Let's start this off with a good old 3-1 series comeback with the 2012 St. Louis Cardinals. Now, the Cardinals that regular season weren't really anything to write home about. They did just win the World Series the year prior, and they added Carlos Beltran that previous offseason to an already pretty solid team full of talent, but they only won 88 games that year. However, they did show up in the postseason. They beat the Braves in the wild card game. Now, they did get a little help from the umpires with the infamous infield fly rule, but I digress. And then they went on to beat the Nationals in the division round, and the Nationals had the best record in Major League Baseball. Then they found themselves up 3-1 against the Giants in the NLCS, but after that, things fell apart. Barry Zito, who was an extremely underwhelming long-term signing for the Giants, pitched 7 2/3 innings of shutout ball. Ryan Vogelsong pitched tremendous in Game 6, and Matt Cain with the bullpen pitched a shutout in Game 7. Now, the Cardinals' bats looked like they were doing pretty solid in the first 3 wins, while also getting pretty solid pitching, but their bats completely went silent in the next 3 games. Now let's talk about the 2011 Phillies. If you're looking for some great starting pitching, well, look no further, because the Phillies rotation in 2011 was stacked. They were dubbed as the 4 aces. You had Roy Halladay, Cliff Lee, Cole Hamels, and Roy Oswalt, along with Vance Worley, an absolutely disgusting unit. And actually, according to Fangraphs, it's considered the best starting pitching of all time with a 27 Fangraph wins above replacement. Now, the offense was nothing really to write home about. They had an overall 96 WRC plus that year, but they still had some solid bats. You had Shane Victorino, you had Chase Utley, Jimmy Rollins, Ryan Howard, Placido Polanco, and they traded for Hunter Pence at the trade deadline. And on top of this, they had great defense. Overall, they won 102 games that year. And actually, speaking of the Cardinals, they ran into the Cardinals in 2011 in the division round. And that Cardinals team just made it into the postseason on the final day of the season. So the Phillies were considered the heavy favorites. Now, the Cardinals, they had other ideas, and they rode the arm of Chris Carpenter and the bats of Albert Pujols, Lance Berkman, and David Freese, and they pulled off a massive upset in 5 games. Now, obviously, give a lot of credit to the Cardinals, but my goodness, it's still crazy to me that this Phillies rotation could not get it done against the Cardinals. Man, oh man, still blows my mind. Next up, let's talk about the Atlanta Braves in the late 90s. Okay, I'm kind of cheating here because I'm talking about multiple teams, and I know the Braves did win it all in 1995, and they made it to the World Series in both 96 and 99, but how in the heck did the Braves not win a World Series during this stretch after the 95 championship? I mean, take a look at the numbers with the starting pitching from 96 to 99. They went 305 and 170 with an ERA of 3.30, a Fangraph wins above replacement of 97.3, easily the best in Major League Baseball during that stretch. You had a trio of Hall of Famers. You had Greg Maddux, John Smoltz, and Tom Glavine. Absolutely disgusting. Their bullpen was also solid during that 4-year stretch. They ranked 4th overall in Fangraph wins above replacement with an ERA of 3.67, but it wasn't just the starting pitching, though, and the bullpen. They also had some good bats in the lineup. You had Chipper Jones, Andrew Jones, who was also one of the best defensive center fielders of all time, Javi Lopez, Ryan Klesko, and some other guys. Just a lot of talent with the Atlanta Braves. Every year, though, they just couldn't get it done. They made it to the World Series in 96, like I said, against the Yankees. They were heavily favored in this World Series, and the Yankees took care of business. That was the beginning of the Yankee dynasty. Then, 1997, they went 101 and 61. They faced an upstart Marlins team who was in their 5th year of existence in the National League Championship Series, and the Marlins won this series in 6 games. My goodness, 1998, that Braves team was so good. They went 106 and 56, but they lost the NLCS to the Padres. My goodness, 1999, like I mentioned earlier, they did make it to the World Series. A very good team, 103 and 59 with a record, and they went up once again against the Yankees, but they got swept in convincing fashion. It blows my mind that the Braves couldn't get it done in the late 90s. Next up, let's talk about the 2007 Cleveland Indians. Now, I feel like not a lot of people remember this one, but as a Red Sox fan, I sure do. Now, there is another comeback with the Red Sox most people will remember, which I'll talk about a little bit later, but in 2007, I think a lot of people forget the Red Sox were down 3-1 in the ALCS to the Indians. Now, this Indians team was very good in 2007. They won 96 games that year, and they had a lot of good players. You had CC Sabathia leading the rotation. Behind him, you had Fausto Carmona, you had Jake Westbrook, Paul Byrd. You had a lot of good bats like Grady Sizemore, Victor Martinez, Travis Hafner, Johnny Peralta, Casey Blake. Now, in the first game, the Red Sox blew them out with 10 runs. They got great pitching from Josh Beckett, but in game 2, the Indians ended up scoring 7 runs in the 11th inning to tie it up, and then in game 3, they took the series lead. They got good games from Kenny Lofton and Asdrubal Cabrera in that one to get the Dice K, and then in game 4, they got great pitching from Paul Byrd. They got some solid offense in that one, and heading into game 5, things were not looking all that great for the Red Sox. They were down 3-1, but the Indians made a costly mistake by having starter Josh Beckett's ex-girlfriend Danielle Peck sing the national anthem. Well, Josh Beckett, he proceeded to dominate. He struck out 11 batters over 8 innings, an absolute gem. And then in game 6, heading back to Fenway, the Red Sox completely obliterated the Indians behind a J.D. Drew grand slam, and they blew it open with a 6-run 8th inning in game 7 to advance to the World Series. A absolutely amazing comeback from the Red Sox, but you definitely got to say, from the Indians' point of view, it was definitely a choke. Next up, let's talk about the 2022 Dodgers. Let's get to the most recent one on this list. The Dodgers a couple of years ago had an insanely good season. They won 111 games, tied for 4th most all time. They ranked 1st overall in offense that year, thanks to great seasons from Mookie Betts, Freddie Freeman, Trey Turner, who each had a Fangraph wins above replacement over 6, along with solid seasons from Will Smith, Justin Turner, and Max Muncy. They were 5th overall in Fangraph WAR with their starting pitching, thanks to Clayton Kershaw, Julio Urias, Tony Gonsolin, and Tyler Anderson. Each of them had an ERA in the 2s. Along with this, the bullpen was also good. They ranked 1st overall that year, thanks to great seasons from Evan Phillips, Alex Vesia, Craig Kimbrell, and Brusdar Graterol. This team was absolutely stacked going into the postseason. Unfortunately, they ran into the little brothers of the National League West, the San Diego Padres. The Padres earned the 2nd wild card spot that year, and they got through the Mets in 3 games to advance to the division round, and they proceeded to take it to the Dodgers in the division round. The Dodgers, they won the first game, but the Padres proceeded to win the next 3, which included good performances from Manny Machado and Jake Cronenworth in game 2, great pitching from Blake Snell in the bullpen in game 3, and a crazy 7th inning in game 4 in which the Padres scored 5 runs after being down 3-0. Now, I know I said earlier in the video that, yeah, the Padres, they were favored in this year's division round, but easily a massive upset back in 2022. Up next, I got the 2011 Texas Rangers. Let's get back to 2011, shall we? And this one still pains me. In fact, the entire 2011 season pains me because my Red Sox completely imploded in the final month of the season to miss the postseason. And then I saw what happened with the Rangers in the World Series, and my goodness, just pain all the way around. But the Rangers were very good in the early 2010s. They made it a back-to-back World Series in both 2010 and 2011, and they looked like they were destined to win it all in 2011. They ran through the Rays and the Tigers in the American League to match up with the Cardinals in the World Series, who I mentioned earlier just barely made it to the postseason that year. Now, they were leading this series 3-2, and they had the Cardinals down to their last strike 2 times, but they failed to come through both times. In the bottom of the 9th, they were leading 7-5, and they had their closer, Neftali Feliz, on the mound, but he proceeded to give up a 2-run triple to David Freese, which tied the game. After a Josh Hamilton 2-run homer in the top of the 10th, though, the Cardinals were once again down to their last strike, but they rallied thanks to Ryan Theriot and Lance Berkman driving in a couple of more runs. David Freese proceeded to hit a walk-off home run in the 11th inning, easily one of the best games of all time. Now, the Rangers still had Game 7, and they had a 2-0 lead in the first inning, but the Cardinals proceeded to tie it up in the bottom half, and they ran away with it and eventually won the World Series. For the Rangers, the fact that they had the Cardinals down to their last strike 2 times and couldn't get the job done, that, in my opinion, is a pretty bad choke. Speaking of the Cardinals, let's talk about the 1985 Cardinals. We got to go back almost 40 years for this one. The Cardinals in 85 were a great team. They won 101 games. Now, the offense wasn't exactly murderer's row as they ranked 2nd to last in home runs that year, but they had a ton of speed and defense with Vince Coleman, Ozzie Smith, Willie McGee, Tom Herr, and Andy Van Slyke. They also had great pitching led by John Tudor, who was amazing that year, finishing second in Cy Young voting with a record of 21-8, an ERA of 1.93, 14 complete games, and 10 shutouts. They ended up edging out the Mets in the East Division, and then they won 4 straight games over the Dodgers in the NLCS after falling down 2-0 in the series. Then they met up with the Royals in the World Series, a team that won 10 less games in the regular season, and they barely beat out the Angels in their own division just to make the postseason. Now, the Cardinals dominated with their pitching in games 1, 2, and 4, only allowing 3 runs in those games to go up 3-1. But then the wheels came off. In Game 5, the Cardinals' bats didn't really show up, but in Game 6, they had the game in hand in the 9th inning. Sure, the bats were still slow, but they had a 1-0 lead thanks to some great pitching. They had rookie Todd Worrell on the mound, their first-round pick from a few years prior, and he'd been pitching well up to that point. The first batter, though, Jorge Orta, hit a chopper to the right side, which the first baseman fielded and flipped back to Worrell, who was covering the bag. He looked out, but infamously, umpire Don Denkinger called him safe, which was clearly a blown call. Now, of course, I'll give the Cardinals a bit of leeway for that, but Worrell proceeded to give up a couple of more base runners, hit a soft liner to right to score 2, and walk it off. This forced a Game 7, which the Royals blew out with an 11-0 win. Now, I get it, the Cardinals had to deal with a blown call and the momentum gained by the Royals, but in the end, the Cardinals still had a 1-0 lead, and they had Game 7, but then you get blown out in Game 7? I mean, come on, that's kind of a choke, if you ask me. Up next, I have the 2001 Seattle Mariners. It feels like forever now Mariners fans have been dealing with broken hearts, but boy, oh boy, 2001 might be the biggest heartbreaker of all time. And speaking of all time, this Mariners team was an absolute juggernaut. They tied the record for most wins in a single season with 116, and this offense was just plain stupid. They ranked 18th all time when it came to single season offenses on Fangraphs. I mean, take a look at the years these guys had. They had Japanese sensation Ichiro come over in his first year. He had 242 hits in his first full season in the major leagues. They had a 157 WRC plus from Edgar Martinez, 37 home runs from Brett Boone, a 401 on base from John Olerud, along with 25 homers and 34 stolen bases from Mike Cameron. They also got great seasons from their pitching staff, including Freddie Garcia, Jamie Moyer, and Aaron Seeley, who each won at least 15 games, while closer Kazuhiro Sasaki, Arthur Rhodes, Jeff Nelson, and Norm Charlton were phenomenal in the bullpen. While this team was legendary in the regular season, I think the postseason lights were just a bit too bright. They did get by a very good Indians team in the division round, which included the likes of Bartolo Colon, Jim Thome, Juan Gonzalez, Roberto Alomar, and Ellis Burks in 5 games, but then they ran into a brick wall of a Yankees team that was coming off 3 straight World Series championships. With Seattle's offense, which ranked first overall in Major League Baseball in 2001, they absolutely had a chance, though. In the end, their offense just came up lagging. They only scored 8 runs in the 4 games they lost, and they just completely rolled over to this Yankee team. In the end, I think this Mariners team will be one of the biggest what-ifs of all time just because of how many games they won in the regular season, and I think this also proves that the postseason really is just a crapshoot, but I think for the Mariners to roll over the way they did in the American League Championship Series really is a choke, in my opinion. Speaking of the Indians, let's talk about the Indians in 2016. Now, the World Series in 2016 was pretty much one that no one wanted to miss. The 2016 World Series between the Cubs and the Indians was the highest rated World Series since 2004, with an average of 22.8 million viewers per game. Why was this? Well, the Cubs were trying to end a 100-year drought of not winning a World Series. No big deal, if you ask me. Now, for the Indians, they had other plans. They ran through the division and championship rounds rather easily, and they went up 3-1 thanks to great pitching from Corey Kluber and Andrew Miller out of the bullpen, along with some good offense from Jason Kipnis, Jose Ramirez, Carlos Santana, and Roberto Perez. However, the wheels came off after that. They dropped Game 5 after Trevor Bauer couldn't hold an early lead, and Josh Tomlin got pounded for 6 runs in Game 6. And then in Game 7, which is honestly one of the best games of all time, go back and watch it if you haven't for some odd reason, And while they did come back after being down 6-3 in that game at one point, thanks to a Rajai Davis home run in the 8th inning off of Aroldis Chapman, they couldn't hold the Cubs down in the 10th inning, and Chicago celebrated its first World Series since 1908. Now, I know most people are going to look back on this and think, hey, this was great for the Cubs, but I mean, goodness, you were up 3-1 in the World Series, and you had a great team, and you couldn't get the job done? And last but not least, I got the 2004 New York Yankees. Excuse Draft Nick Robbie here, and Yankee fans, don't be mad at me, but I mean, come on. How could this not be number one? The Yankees in 2004 were the only team ever to be leading 3-0 in a 7-game series and then lose the next 4 games. Now, obviously, a lot of credit goes to my Red Sox in putting together the comeback. They got the clutch hit from Bill Miller and the clutch steal from Dave Roberts in the 9th inning of Game 4 against Mariano Rivera, and then David Ortiz at the walk-off home run in extra innings. He proceeded to get the walk-off hit in Game 5, and they got great pitching from Curt Schilling and Derek Lowe in Game 6 and 7, along with the offensive outburst in Game 7. However, when you think back to how the Yankees handled their business in Games 1 through 3, along with just all the talent the Yankees had, especially in the lineup with Alex Rodriguez, Derek Jeter, Gary Sheffield, Bernie Williams, Jorge Posada, it's pretty crazy that they weren't able to close the deal in Games 4 through 7. The offense scored a combined 32 runs and 43 hits in Games 1 through 3, with 19 of those runs coming in Game 3, an absolute onslaught at Fenway Park, and they were getting great pitching from Mike Mussina and John Lieber. In Games 4 and 5, though, the bullpen didn't do them any favors. Mariano Rivera wasn't able to lock it down in Game 4, with David Ortiz hitting the walk-off home run in the 12th inning, like I mentioned earlier. In Game 5, Tom Gordon, and once again, Mariano Rivera let the Red Sox claw their way back before getting walked off again by David Ortiz in the 14th inning. In Game 6, they were only able to get 4 hits off Curt Schilling, who was pitching on a bad ankle. And then in Game 7, Kevin Brown and Javier Vazquez absolutely imploded. In the end, this is easily the greatest comeback of all time in sports history, but also the biggest choke of all time. So those are the teams that I think were the biggest chokes in postseason history. Let me know down below in the comments. What are some other teams that you think belong on this list? But everyone, that's all I got for right now. If you can on the way out, hit that like button for me, subscribe if you're new, and I'll talk to you next time.